The thing about family dinners at my parents' house is that they follow a script. Dad sits at the head of the table in the chair he's occupied for 30 years. Mom brings out the roast or the chicken or whatever she spent all afternoon preparing. My older brother Kevin talks about his sales numbers. My younger sister Michelle shows photos of her kids. And I sit quietly eating my food, being the family disappointment. "How's the apartment search going?" Mom asked, passing the mashed potatoes. "Still looking," I said. Which was true in a sense. I was always looking at real estate. Just not apartments for myself. Dad cut into his steak with more force than necessary. "At 34 you should own something by now. Kevin bought his first house at 28. Kevin nodded from across the table. "Market was better then, but still. You've got to build equity, Sarah. Renting is throwing money away." "I'm aware," I said mildly. "Are you?" Dad set down his knife and fork, giving me his full attention. The attention that used to make me nervous when I was younger, desperate for his approval. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been working at that property management company for what, 8 years? And you've got nothing to show for it." 7 years, actually. 7, 8, what's the difference? Point is, you're spinning your wheels. Living in that tiny apartment, driving a 10-year-old Camry. Stop pretending to be successful when you're clearly not. Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, raised his wine glass in agreement. "Your father's right. At your age you should have assets. Property. Investments. You'll never own anything at the rate you're going." I kept eating my dinner, cutting my steak into precise pieces. "You're probably right." Michelle jumped in, trying to help in her well-meaning way. "Sarah works really hard, Dad. Property management is a real job." I didn't say it wasn't a real job. I said it's not getting her anywhere. Dad leaned back in his chair. "You know what your problem is? You're too passive. Too willing to just accept whatever comes your way instead of fighting for more." Mom placed her hand on Dad's arm. "Richard, maybe we could talk about something else." "No, Barbara. She needs to hear this. All her life, Sarah's been content to just exist. No ambition. No drive. Look at Kevin, he's a regional sales director. Michelle married well, has a beautiful family. And Sarah's still in that cramped apartment complex doing admin work." The property management company where I worked was called Sterling Properties. I'd started there 7 years ago as an assistant property manager, learning the business from the ground up. Rent collection, maintenance requests, tenant relations, lease agreements. The unglamorous work of keeping buildings running and people housed. What Dad didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years into that job I'd started buying properties myself. Small ones at first. A duplex that needed work. A 4-unit building in a transitioning neighborhood. I'd learned to spot potential, to run the numbers, to manage contractors and renovations and tenant relationships. What they really didn't know was that I'd bought Dad's house 5 years ago when he was facing foreclosure after a bad business investment. Bought it through an LLC, hired a management company to handle the ownership details, and let him think he'd worked out a special arrangement with the bank. The property taxes, the insurance, the major repairs. All of it flowed through my accounts while Dad thought he was making his mortgage payments to some faceless lending institution. "I'm doing okay," I said quietly. "Okay isn't good enough." Dad's voice rose. "You're 34 years old. When I was your age, I owned this house, had 2 kids, and was building a business. What do you have?" I looked at him across the table. At the house that was legally mine, that I'd saved when his construction business hit hard times. At the property tax bills I paid every November. The homeowner's insurance I renewed every spring, the new roof I'd approved last year when he thought the bank was covering it. "Not much," I said. "You're right about that." Kevin shook his head. "Sarah, you've got to want more for yourself. That's all Dad's saying. Have some ambition." "Kevin's mortgage is $2,800 a month," Dad said proudly. "That's $33,600 a year in equity he's building. What are you paying in rent? $1,200? That's $14,400 a year you'll never see again." Actually, my rent was $950 for a perfectly nice 1-bedroom apartment that required 0 maintenance from me. And the 18 properties I owned across 3 counties generated about $47,000 a month in gross rental income, minus expenses. But who was counting? "You make a good point," I said. Uncle Frank leaned forward. "You need to get aggressive, Sarah. Real estate is wealth building. I've got 3 rental properties myself. Bought them over the years, built up equity. That's how you create financial security. 3 properties. I'd closed on my 19th 2 weeks ago. A 6-unit building near the university that would generate strong rental income from student housing. That's impressive, Uncle Frank, I said sincerely. As it was impressive. 3 rental properties was more than most people ever accumulated. It's not rocket science, he continued. You just have to stop being afraid of debt. Leverage is your friend. Take out a loan, buy a property, rent it out. The tenants pay your mortgage. I'll think about it, I said. Dad sighed heavily. That's what you always say. I'll think about it. Meanwhile, time's passing. You're getting older. At some point, you've got to stop thinking and start doing. Mom cleared her throat. Who wants dessert? I made apple pie. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Kevin's latest sales trip, Michelle's youngest starting kindergarten, Uncle Frank's upcoming vacation. I helped Mom clear the dishes, accepted my slice of pie, and continued playing my role as the family underachiever. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my property manager at Sterling Properties, where I still worked full-time because I actually enjoyed the work. Tenant in Unit 4B says kitchen sink is leaking. Should I call the plumber? I texted back, yes, use Jerry. He's familiar with that building. Sarah, put the phone away at dinner, Dad said without looking at me. Sorry. I slipped it back in my pocket. After dessert, I helped Mom load the dishwasher while the men watched a football game in the living room. Don't take it personally, Mom said quietly. Your father just wants the best for you. I know. He worries. We both do. You're so quiet about your life, we never know what's really going on with you. I handed her another plate. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Are you dating anyone? Not at the moment. You should try those dating apps. Michelle met several nice men before she met Tom. I'll consider it. She patted my arm. You're a good girl, Sarah. I just wish you'd fight for yourself a little more. Let people see what you're capable of. If only she knew. Monday morning, I was at my desk at Sterling Properties when my phone rang. Dad's accountant, Gerald Morrison. Ms. Chin? This is Gerald Morrison. I handle your father's accounts. I know who you are, Gerald. What can I do for you? I'm reviewing your father's tax documents for the year, and I've noticed something unusual. The property tax payments on the house, they're not coming from his bank account. My stomach tightened. Okay. They're coming from an LLC. Meridian Property Holdings. I've been trying to track down the payment source because the records your father has don't match what I'm seeing from the county assessor's office. I see. Miss Chin, do you know anything about this? Your father seems to think he's been making these payments through his mortgage servicer, but that's not what the records show. They show direct payments from Meridian Property Holdings, which according to state business records, is registered to you. I closed my office door. Yes. That's my company. Your company has been paying your father's property taxes? For the last 5 years, yes. Silence on the other end. Then, Miss Chin, forgive me for being direct, but why? Because 5 years ago Dad was facing foreclosure. His business had taken some hits, he'd missed several payments, and the bank was starting proceedings. He didn't tell anyone because he was embarrassed. I found out through a friend who works in county records. And you? I bought the house. Paid off the mortgage, transferred the deed to my LLC. I hired a management company to handle the owner communications so Dad would think he was dealing with a bank or servicer. He makes his payments to the management account, which covers about 60% of the actual costs. I cover the rest: property taxes, insurance, major repairs. More silence. Does he know? No. Miss Chin, I have to disclose this to my client. This is his tax return we're discussing, and there are significant implications if he doesn't own the property he thinks he owns. I understand. Do what you need to do. For what it's worth, Gerald said, his voice softer, that was an extraordinarily generous thing you did. He's my father. He needed help. Still, most children couldn't, do something like that. After we hung up, I stared at my computer screen without really seeing it. 5 years of careful management, of quiet help, of letting Dad maintain his dignity while I kept the house he loved from being sold at auction. All about to be revealed because of tax season. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Need to talk. Come by the house tonight. I drove to the house that evening. The house I legally owned, though it hadn't felt like mine in any real sense. Dad answered the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated. Living room, he said. Mom was already there, sitting on the couch with a tissue in her hand. Uncle Frank was there too, standing by the fireplace. Kevin and Michelle hadn't been summoned to this particular family meeting. Gerald called me today, Dad said without preamble. Told me something very interesting about the property taxes on this house. I sat down in the chair across from the couch. Okay. He says you've been paying them. That you've been paying them because you own this house. My house. Technically, yes. Technically. Dad's voice rose. What the hell does that mean technically? It means legally the house is owned by my LLC. Meridian Property Holdings. You've been making payments to a management account that I set up. Those payments cover about 60% of the actual costs. I cover the difference. Mom pressed the tissue to her mouth. Uncle Frank stared at me like I'd announced I was an alien. 5 years, Dad said. Gerald says this has been going on for 5 years. Yes. Why? Because you were facing foreclosure. Because the bank was going to take the house you and Mom have lived in for 30 years. Because you needed help and were too proud to ask for it. Dad sat down heavily. I was working it out with the bank. I had a plan. You were 3 months from foreclosure proceedings. I checked. There was no plan that was going to save the house in time. So you just bought it? Without telling me? Yes. With what money? Uncle Frank interjected. Sarah, where did you get the money to buy a house? This house was worth $380,000 5 years ago. I looked at him steadily. I had it. From where? From the real estate portfolio I've been building for 9 years. I started with a duplex I bought with money I'd saved from working double shifts at Sterling. Fixed it up, rented it out, used the income and equity to buy another property. Then another. I've got 19 properties now across 3 counties. The portfolio is worth about $8.4 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. 8. Mom couldn't finish the sentence. Million. Give or take depending on current market valuations. The properties generate about $47,000 a month in gross rental income. After expenses, mortgages, taxes, insurance, maintenance, property management fees, I clear about $22,000 a month in profit. Dad's face had gone pale. You're a millionaire. Several times over, yes. But you work at a property management company. You drive a 10-year-old Camry. You live in a $950 apartment that requires zero maintenance from me and lets me focus my capital on income-generating properties instead of personal real estate. I kept my voice calm. I work at Sterling because I enjoy it and because it keeps me connected to the industry. The Camry runs perfectly well. I don't need a fancy car to prove anything. Uncle Frank sat down on the arm of the couch. 19 properties. 19. Most are small multifamily buildings. 4 to 8 units. One is a 12-unit apartment complex I bought at auction 3 years ago and renovated. That one alone generates $14,000 a month. Jesus Christ, Dad whispered. Mom was crying now, actually crying. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? I tried to. Multiple times over the years. But every time I mention real estate investing or property ownership, someone would change the subject or suggest I was getting ahead of myself. Eventually I stopped trying. But at dinner just last night, Dad stopped, his face flushing. I told you that you'd never own anything. You did. And you just sat there. You let me lecture you about building equity and wealth creation when you're... He couldn't finish. When I've been quietly doing exactly what you said people should do. Yes. Uncle Frank shook his head slowly. 3 properties. I've been proud of owning 3 rental properties. And you're sitting there with 19. Your 3 properties are impressive, Uncle Frank. You built them over time carefully, which is the right way to do it. I just had more time and got lucky with some of the purchases. Don't do that, Dad said sharply. Don't downplay what you've done. $8 million isn't luck. No, I agreed. It's 9 years of 18-hour days. It's learning to read market trends and spot undervalued properties. It's developing relationships with contractors and learning to manage renovations under budget. It's tenant management and legal compliance and financial modeling and risk assessment. It's a lot of things, but luck is only a small part of it. Mom wiped her eyes. The house. You saved the house. I saved your house. Dad's house. The house where I grew up. Yes. Why? Dad's voice cracked. Why would you do that without telling me? Because you needed help and wouldn't have accepted it if you'd known it was coming from me. Because you were ashamed of the business problems and didn't want anyone to know. Because I had the ability to help and it seemed like the right thing to do. But you let me think. He stopped, swallowed hard. I've been making those payments every month. Thinking I was paying a mortgage, maintaining my house, being responsible. And it wasn't all fake, Dad. You were being responsible. Those payments you make cover most of the operating costs. The property taxes and insurance I handle separately, yes, but you're not living here for free. You're contributing significantly to the household expenses. 60%, Gerald said. About that, yes. The taxes alone are $8,200 a year. Insurance is another $2,400. Your payments don't quite cover everything, but they cover a lot. Uncle Frank stood up suddenly. I need a drink. Richard, you want a drink? Yeah, Dad said. Yeah, I do. They went to the kitchen, leaving me alone with Mom. Sarah, she said softly. When you said you were looking at apartments, what did you actually mean? I was looking at a 12-unit building in Riverside. Needs some work, but the location is good and I think I can get it for under market value. I made an offer last week. So you're not looking for a place to live? No. I'm happy where I am. Low overhead means more capital for investment. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Your father told you that you'd never own anything. And you own our house. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for being generous and discreet and everything we raised you to be. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd seen it. I tried to tell you, Mom. Remember 2 years ago at Thanksgiving? I mentioned I was thinking about expanding into commercial properties. You said that sounded nice and asked if I'd tried online dating. She covered her face with her hands. Oh God. I remember that. I thought you meant you were thinking about maybe buying a small rental house someday. I meant I was considering purchasing a 6,000 square foot commercial building to convert into office spaces. Did you buy it? Yes. It's fully leased now. 3 businesses, generating $8,500 a month. Dad and Uncle Frank returned with whiskey glasses. Dad handed one to Mom, who took it without protest. I don't understand, Dad said, sitting down across from me again. How did we not see this? How did we miss that you were building an empire while we thought you were struggling? Because I didn't need you to see it. I just needed to build it. But why? Why let us think you were? He gestured helplessly. Unsuccessful. Directionless. A disappointment. I met his eyes. Because correcting you every time you made assumptions was exhausting. Because I got tired of trying to make you understand. Because at some point, I realized my success didn't require your validation. The words hung in the air between us. Uncle Frank broke the silence. That's fair. Brutal but fair. I'm not trying to be brutal. I'm trying to be honest. You asked why I didn't tell you. I'm telling you. I tried. You didn't hear me. Eventually I stopped trying. Mom set down her whiskey glass with a sharp click. And the house. When were you planning to tell us about the house? Honestly, I wasn't. I was going to keep paying the taxes and insurance and let you live here as long as you wanted. When you eventually passed away, I'd have quietly transferred it to Kevin or Michelle. Nobody needed to know. That's insane, Kevin's voice came from the doorway. Michelle stood behind him. Apparently word had spread and they'd come over. Is it? I turned to look at them. What would have been better? Telling Dad I'd bought his house out from under him? Making him feel like he'd failed so completely that his daughter had to rescue him? That seemed crueler than just handling it quietly. She's got a point, Michelle said softly. Kevin came into the room followed by Michelle. Sarah, this is crazy. You're a property manager. How do you own 19 buildings? 20. I closed on number 20 last week. 6-unit building near the university. 20 properties. Jesus. Kevin sat down on the floor, apparently unable to process this information, standing up. And you work at Sterling, why? Because I like it. Because property management was how I learned the business. Because keeping that job means I stay grounded in the actual work of maintaining properties rather than just collecting rent checks from a distance. Dad was staring into his whiskey glass. 5 years. You've been saving my house for 5 years and letting me lecture you about building equity and financial responsibility. You weren't wrong about the principles, Dad. Building equity is important. Owning property creates wealth. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything, he said bitterly. You figured it out on your own while I was too busy being disappointed in you to see what you'd actually accomplished. That's not entirely true. You taught me to spot good value. Remember taking me to estate sales when I was a kid? You'd evaluate properties, point out what needed fixing, what had potential. I learned that from you. Estate sales, he repeated. You learned real estate investing from me taking you to garage sales. I learned to see potential. To understand that something's current condition doesn't define its future value. That's the foundation of everything I've built. Michelle was crying now too. Apparently it was a family trait. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I thought you were just, I don't know, content with not having much. And the whole time you've been running a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. Yeah. I looked around at my family, at all these people who'd known me my whole life without really seeing me. Look, I know this is a lot to process. And I know you all feel bad about the assumptions you made. But I don't need apologies. I need you to understand that I'm okay. I've always been okay. I didn't need saving or fixing or lectures about ambition. I just needed to be left alone to build what I was building. But we could have helped, Mom said. If we'd known. You couldn't have helped. Not really. This wasn't about money or connections. It was about learning a business from the ground up. Making mistakes, figuring things out. The help I needed was the kind I had to find myself. Uncle Frank raised his glass. To Sarah, who apparently has more balls than all of us combined. Frank, Mom said reprovingly, but she was smiling slightly. What? It's true. She bought her father's house without telling him to save his pride. That takes guts. Dad finally looked up from his whiskey. What happens now? What do you mean? With the house. It's yours. Legally yours. What are you planning to do with it? Nothing. You live here, you keep making your payments, everything continues exactly as it has been. The only thing that changes is now you know the truth. But you own it. On paper, yes. But it's your home. That doesn't change. Sarah, we can't just live in your house without. Why not? You're already doing it. You have been for 5 years. Nothing has to change unless you want it to. Mom shook her head. Everything's changed. We thought we knew you and we didn't know you at all. You knew me. You just didn't know what I did for a living. There's a difference. Is there? Dad set down his glass. Because I'm sitting here realizing that I told my millionaire daughter that she'd never amount to anything. I lectured her about ambition while she was quietly saving my house. I don't know how to. His voice broke. I don't know how to come back from that. You don't need to come back from anything, Dad. You were wrong about my circumstances, but you weren't wrong about the principles. Property ownership is important. Building equity matters. Financial security is worth pursuing. You taught me that. I just applied it differently than you expected. I called you passive, he said. Last night at dinner I said you were too passive, too willing to accept whatever came your way. I remember. And the whole time you've been one of the most aggressive real estate investors I've never heard of. I smiled slightly. I prefer strategic to aggressive, but yeah, essentially. Kevin was scrolling through his phone. I just Googled Meridian Property Holdings. There's a business listing. It says, Commercial and Residential Property Management and Investment. That's your company. That's one of my companies. I have 3 LLCs for different purposes. Keeps the liability separate. 3 companies, he repeated. You have 3 companies. And she still drives a Camry, Uncle Frank said, shaking his head. Unbelievable. The Camry runs great. Why would I replace it? Because you can afford to. Dad said, gesturing wildly. Sarah, you're worth $8 million. You could drive a Mercedes. You could live in a mansion. You could. I could, I agreed. But I don't want to. I like my life the way it is. Simple. Efficient. Focused on work I find meaningful rather than consumption I don't need. Michelle spoke up from the doorway. What do you need? What? You said consumption you don't need. What do you actually need? What makes you happy? I thought about it. Seeing a property I've renovated come back to life. Helping tenants find affordable, well-maintained housing. Solving the puzzle of how to make a building profitable while keeping rents reasonable. That makes me happy. Not things, Michelle said. Work makes you happy. Good work makes me happy. Work that matters makes me happy. Dad stood up suddenly. I need to apologize. Properly. Not just for last night but for every time I suggested you weren't doing enough, weren't being enough, weren't enough. Sarah, I'm sorry. Dad. No, let me finish. I'm your father. I should have seen you. I should have asked questions and actually listened to the answers. I should have trusted that you knew what you were doing even when it didn't look like what I expected success to look like. He crossed the room and pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago but I'm saying it now. I'm so damn proud of you. I hugged him back, this complicated man who'd driven me crazy and motivated me in equal measure. Thanks, Dad. The house, he said, pulling back. We should talk about the house. About making this arrangement more official, more fair to you. It's already fair. You're contributing what you can. I'm covering the rest. It works. But your money is being used the way I want to use it. Dad, do you know what financial security means to me? It means knowing that the people I love have stable housing. That you and Mom can stay in the house where you raised us. That's worth more than any Mercedes or mansion. Mom was crying again but smiling through the tears. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between property 3 and property 4. Right around the time I realized that wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you can do for the people and causes you care about. The next Sunday dinner was different. Dad didn't lecture me about ambition. Kevin asked actual questions about property management and real estate investing. Michelle wanted to know about the renovation process. Uncle Frank asked for advice about his 3 rental properties. Mom still made pot roast. We still sat around the same table. But the conversation had changed, opened up, become more honest. I looked at that building in Riverside, I said over dinner. The 12-unit. Going to pass on it. Foundation issues that would cost more to fix than the property's worth. Smart, Dad said. Always check the foundation. You taught me that. He smiled. Maybe I taught you more than I thought. You taught me plenty. You just didn't realize I was paying attention. After dinner, Dad and I did the dishes while everyone else watched football in the living room. He washed, I dried, the same division of labor we'd had since I was a kid. The property taxes are due next month, he said casually. For the house. I know. I've got it covered. Sarah, I'd like to pay them myself this year. The full amount. I looked at him. Dad, it's $8,200. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. But I want to. You've been covering them for 5 years. Let me do it this year. Okay, I said softly. If that's what you want. What I want is to contribute properly to the house I live in. What I want is to stop letting my daughter carry financial burdens I should be carrying. What I want is to be a better father than I've been. You've been a fine father. I've been a blind father. But I'm working on seeing better. He handed me another plate. Tell me about property 21. What are you looking at next? So I told him about the 8-unit building I was considering in East Side, about the market analysis I'd done, about the potential for renovation and improved rental income. He asked good questions, offered insights from his construction days, made suggestions about contractors who might do good work. We talked real estate and business and building wealth, father and daughter finally on the same page. Mom found us there an hour later, still at the sink, still talking, making up for years of conversations we should have had. You two going to stand there all night? Maybe, Dad said grinning. Your daughter's teaching me about capitalization rates. God help us all, Mom said, but she was smiling. I drove home that night to my $950 apartment in my 10-year-old Camry, past several properties I owned, past the life I'd built while everyone thought I was barely scraping by. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Thank you. For everything. But especially for the house. Love you. I texted back. Love you too. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to work without pressure, to build without scrutiny, to become who you're meant to be without everyone watching and judging every move. But being seen, finally being seen for what you've actually accomplished, that has its own value. I parked in my assigned spot, climbed the stairs to my simple apartment, and pulled up the listing for property 21. 8 units, good bones, strong potential. I'd make an offer in the morning. As this was what I did. What I'd always done. What I'd keep doing regardless of whether anyone was watching or not. Building. Growing. Creating something that mattered. One property at a time. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in the Martinez family, I had always been viewed as the dreamer, the one with unrealistic expectations about money and success. While my older siblings had pursued traditional career paths, Elena became a nurse, Carlos joined the police force, and Maria worked in accounting, I had chosen a more unconventional route that my family consistently dismissed as financially irresponsible. To them, I was the 30-year-old who worked as a freelance financial consultant, lived in a modest apartment, and drove a reliable but unremarkable sedan. What they didn't understand was that my freelance consulting involved managing a diversified investment portfolio worth approximately $2.3 billion, including a controlling stake in Regional Community Bank, the institution that held the mortgages on every single property owned by my extended family. The bank acquisition had happened 3 years ago, during a period when Regional Community Bank was struggling with liquidity issues and regulatory compliance problems. Through a complex network of investment vehicles and holding companies, I had quietly purchased 68% of the bank's outstanding shares for $340 million. The transaction had been structured to keep my identity hidden from both the bank's management and its customers, including my family members who had been banking there for over 2 decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every month, when my parents made their mortgage payment, when Elena paid for her townhouse, when Carlos sent in his condo payment, and when Maria covered her suburban home loan, they were essentially paying rent to me. The bank they trusted with their financial futures was controlled by the family member they considered financially naive. This particular family gathering was taking place at my parents' house to celebrate my 30th birthday. The house itself, a comfortable 3-bedroom ranch in a middle-class neighborhood, was mortgaged through Regional Community Bank for $280,000. My parents had refinanced twice over the years, most recently to take advantage of lower interest rates that had been approved by loan officers who ultimately reported to me. "I've been thinking about your career situation," Dad announced as we sat down for dinner. 30 is a significant milestone. It's time to start thinking seriously about your financial future. Dad's right, Elena added. Freelance work is fine when you're in your 20s, but you need to think about stability and benefits now. I nodded politely and continued eating my birthday cake. There was no point in mentioning that my unstable freelance income had generated returns of $127 million in the previous fiscal year, or that my benefits package included ownership stakes in multiple financial institutions. The problem with consulting work, Carlos said, is that it's unpredictable. One month you might have several clients, the next month you could have nothing. Exactly, Maria agreed. You need to think about building equity and establishing credit. How are you supposed to qualify for a mortgage or car loan without steady employment? The family nodded in agreement. This was familiar territory, my siblings offering practical advice to their younger brother who had clearly failed to grasp basic financial realities. I've actually been looking at some opportunities, I said quietly. What kind of opportunities? Mom asked with interest. There are some positions available at local banks and credit unions. Entry-level roles, but they offer good training programs and advancement potential. The family seemed encouraged by this development. Finally, their impractical brother was considering a sensible career in traditional financial services. Banking is a solid field, Dad said approvingly. People will always need financial services, and there's real opportunity for growth if you're willing to work hard. Which banks are you considering? Elena asked. Regional Community Bank has some interesting openings, I replied. They seem like a well-managed institution with strong community ties. Carlos nodded knowingly. That's where we have our mortgage. They've always been professional and responsive. Good reputation in the community. Regional Community is where all of U.S. Bank, Maria added. They approved my home loan 2 years ago when some of the larger banks were being difficult about lending requirements. I smiled and took another bite of cake. It was true that Regional Community had approved Maria's loan, though she had no idea that the approval had come after I had specifically instructed the lending committee to prioritize her application despite some minor credit issues. The important thing, Dad continued, is that you're finally being realistic about your career options. This freelance consulting thing has gone on long enough. Dad's right, Elena said. You need to accept that not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship or high-level business roles. There's nothing wrong with working for an established institution. The family murmured in agreement. They had spent years watching me pursue what they viewed as unrealistic financial goals, and they were relieved to see me finally considering a conventional career path. Banking might actually suit your personality, Carlos said. You've always been good with numbers and you understand how money works better than most people. Thanks, I said. I appreciate the encouragement. Just remember, Maria added, starting in an entry-level position means you'll need to prove yourself like everyone else. You can't expect special treatment just because you have some consulting experience. As dinner continued, the conversation moved to other topics, but the family kept returning to their favorite subject: my need to develop more realistic expectations about money and career success. They discussed their own financial milestones, Elena's recent refinancing, Carlos's plans to pay off his condo early, Maria's savings goals for her children's education. Throughout the conversation, I listened with interest as they described their relationships with regional community bank. Elena praised the customer service representatives, Carlos appreciated the competitive interest rates, and Maria was grateful for the flexible lending policies that had made her home purchase possible. None of them realized they were describing the customer experience I had specifically designed when I acquired the bank. The competitive rates resulted from my decision to prioritize customer retention over short-term profit margins. The flexible lending policies reflected my instructions to focus on community development rather than strictly algorithmic underwriting. The excellent customer service was the result of staff training programs I had funded to differentiate regional community from larger, more impersonal institutions. The best part about regional community, Elena said, is that they really seem to care about their customers. It's not like dealing with some massive corporate bank where you're just an account number. That's exactly why community banks are so important, Dad agreed. They understand local needs and develop personal relationships with their customers. I nodded appreciatively. Dad was right about the importance of community banking, though he didn't realize he was explaining my own business philosophy back to me. Regional Community has been our family's bank for over 20 years, Mom added. They've helped us through refinancing home equity loans and even some difficult periods when money was tight. That kind of loyalty and customer service is rare these days, Carlos said. A lot of banks would have been much less flexible during tough times. As the evening progressed, the family became increasingly focused on what they viewed as my financial delusions and unrealistic expectations. Dad, in particular, seemed determined to deliver a reality check about money and career success. The thing you need to understand, Dad said, leaning forward in his chair, is that financial success requires discipline, patience, and realistic goal setting. You can't just dream about becoming wealthy. You have to work within the system and build wealth gradually. Dad's absolutely right, Elena said. Look at how we've all approached our finances. We bought houses we could afford, we make our mortgage payments on time, and we save money consistently. That's how you build real financial security. Exactly, Carlos added. Financial responsibility means living within your means and making smart, conservative decisions. Taking big risks or chasing unrealistic returns is how people get into serious trouble. The family nodded in agreement. They had all followed traditional financial advice: steady employment, manageable debt, conservative savings, and they had achieved comfortable middle-class lifestyles as a result. The problem with your consulting approach, Maria said, is that it's based on unrealistic expectations about how much money you can make. Real financial planning requires understanding market realities and accepting reasonable returns on investment. That's exactly right, Dad said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. You're financially delusional if you think you can just skip the normal steps and somehow become wealthy through consulting work. The family murmured their agreement. This was the intervention they had been planning. A direct confrontation with my unrealistic financial expectations and impractical career choices. Accept your reality and stop embarrassing us, Dad continued. You're 30 years old and you're still living like a college student. It's time to grow up and start building a real financial foundation." Everyone agreed I needed a reality check. Elena nodded sympathetically, Carlos looked concerned but supportive, and Maria seemed relieved that someone was finally addressing the elephant in the room. I nodded silently and continued eating my birthday cake. There was no point in arguing or defending my choices. The family had made their position clear, and they deserved to understand the consequences of their assumptions. "You're right," I said simply. Dad seemed pleased with my response. "The banking position at Regional Community could be exactly what you need. Steady income, professional development opportunities, and a chance to learn how real financial institutions operate." "It would certainly be educational," I agreed. As the evening wound down, family members began clearing dishes and preparing to leave. The conversation had served its purpose. Everyone felt they had contributed to helping me understand the importance of financial realism and career stability. "Think about what we discussed tonight," Dad said as I was getting ready to leave. "This banking opportunity could be the start of a real career." "I'll definitely consider it," I replied. "Don't just consider it," Elena added. "You need to take action and start building the kind of financial foundation that will support you long-term." "Absolutely," I said. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the conversation. The family had been more direct than usual about their concerns, more explicit about their view that my financial expectations were unrealistic and embarrassing. They had invested significant emotional energy in what they believed was a necessary intervention. It was time for them to understand the actual reality of the situation. Monday morning, I called Regional Community Bank from my home office. "Good morning, this is calling regarding a comprehensive review of certain mortgage accounts," I said when the bank president answered. "Of course," he replied. "What specific accounts would you like us to review?" "I want a complete analysis of all mortgage terms for the Martinez family accounts," I said. "Elena Martinez, Carlos Martinez, Maria Santos, and Robert and Carmen Martinez." "Understood. Any particular issues we should be looking for?" I considered the question carefully. All of the family mortgages were current and in good standing, but there were some interesting opportunities for policy adjustments that would help illustrate the relationship between financial reality and institutional control. "I want to review the interest rate structures, payment schedules, and any special accommodations that have been provided," I said. "Also prepare documentation showing how these accounts have been managed relative to our standard lending policies." "I'll have everything ready this afternoon." The analysis revealed what I had expected. Over the years, my family members had benefited from various accommodations and favorable terms that reflected my instructions to prioritize customer service and community relationships. Elena's mortgage had been approved despite some credit issues. Carlos had received interest rate reductions during a period of financial difficulty. Maria's loan terms had been adjusted to accommodate her income fluctuations. My parents had been approved for refinancing that might not have qualified under strictly algorithmic underwriting. All of these accommodations had been appropriate from a community banking perspective, but they also demonstrated how much my family's financial stability depended on the institution they took for granted. "I want to implement some policy adjustments," I told the bank president during our afternoon call. "Nothing inappropriate or punitive, but I think we should ensure that all customers are being treated according to our standard procedures." "What kind of adjustments are you thinking about?" "Interest rate reviews based on current market conditions, payment schedule optimizations, and compliance audits to ensure all accommodations are properly documented and justified." The president understood immediately. "Should we prioritize any particular accounts for this review process?" "Start with the Martinez family accounts," I said. "I want to make sure we're providing consistent professional service that reflects our institutional standards." The policy adjustments began Tuesday morning. Each family member received a letter from Regional Community Bank explaining that their mortgage terms were being reviewed as part of a comprehensive policy update designed to ensure consistent customer service and regulatory compliance. Elena called me Tuesday evening, sounding confused and concerned. "I got this weird letter from Regional Community Bank," she said. "They want to review my mortgage terms and payment schedule." "That sounds routine," I said. "Banks periodically review their loan portfolios to ensure everything is in compliance." but they're asking for updated financial documentation and suggesting that my interest rate might need to be adjusted based on current market conditions. I could hear papers rustling in the background as Elena reviewed the letter. Did they give you any specific concerns about your account? They mentioned that some of the original loan terms reflected legacy accommodation policies that are being updated to ensure consistent treatment across all customer accounts. That sounds like standard regulatory compliance language, I said. Banks have to demonstrate that they're treating all customers fairly and consistently. I guess so, Elena said, though she didn't sound convinced. It's just strange timing. We've been banking with them for years without any issues. Carlos called Wednesday morning with similar concerns. Regional Community sent me some kind of policy review notice, he said. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss my mortgage terms. What kind of meeting? I asked. Something about ensuring that all customers are receiving appropriate service levels and that loan terms reflect current market standards. It sounds pretty serious. Carlos paused, then added, the letter mentions that my account may have received certain accommodations that need to be reviewed and potentially adjusted. Did they specify what accommodations they're referring to? Interest rate reductions during my financial difficulties a few years ago, and some flexibility with payment timing when I was between jobs. But those accommodations helped me keep the house. I thought they were just good customer service. They probably were, I said. But banks have to document everything carefully to prove they're not showing favoritism or discrimination. By Thursday, all 4 family members had received similar letters and were growing increasingly anxious about their mortgage situations. Maria called that evening, sounding particularly stressed. This bank review is really worrying me, she said. The letter suggests that my loan terms might not be available under current lending policies. What does that mean practically? I asked. They're saying that if I were applying for the same loan today, I might not qualify for the same interest rate or payment structure. They want to normalize my account to reflect current standards. Maria's voice carried real concern. If they increase my interest rate or change my payment schedule, I'm not sure I can afford the house anymore. Have you talked to anyone at the bank directly? I called the customer service number, but they just said this is a standard policy review and that I'll need to meet with a loan officer to discuss the details. By Friday morning, all 4 family members were dealing with mortgage reviews that could potentially affect their housing costs and financial stability. The accommodations and favorable terms they had received over the years were being scrutinized and potentially adjusted to reflect current market conditions and standard lending policies. Dad called Friday afternoon, his voice tense with worry and frustration. Something's going on at Regional Community Bank, he said. This isn't just a routine review. They're questioning every aspect of our mortgage terms. What exactly are they telling you? That our refinancing terms from 3 years ago reflected legacy policies that may not be available under current guidelines. They want to adjust our interest rate to match what new customers would receive today. Dad paused, then continued, the problem is that current rates are significantly higher than what we're paying now. If they force us to accept current market rates, our monthly payment could increase by $400 or $500. That's a substantial change, I agreed. We can't afford that kind of increase, Dad said. We budgeted our retirement planning based on our current mortgage payment. If Regional Community forces us to accept higher rates, we might have to consider selling the house. The family spent the weekend frantically researching their options and trying to understand what had triggered Regional Community Bank's sudden interest in reviewing their accounts. They had all been model customers for years, making payments on time and maintaining good relationships with the bank staff. Elena called Saturday morning with an update. I met with a loan officer yesterday, she said. She was professional but not very encouraging about keeping my current terms. What did she tell you? That the bank is implementing new policies to ensure all customers are treated consistently, and that some of the accommodations I received might not be available under current standards. Elena's voice carried genuine anxiety. She suggested I might want to start shopping around with other lenders to see if I can find better terms elsewhere. That seems like reasonable advice, I said. But other banks are quoting rates that are even higher than what Regional Community is proposing. It seems like the whole lending market has changed. Carlos had a similar experience when he met with the bank Monday morning. They're being very professional, he told me during his lunch break. But it's clear they want to adjust my terms significantly. What kind of adjustments? Higher interest rate, less flexible payment timing, and stricter income verification requirements going forward. The loan officer said these changes would bring my account into compliance with current institutional standards. Carlos sounded defeated. I asked if there was anything I could do to keep my current terms, but she said the policy review was being conducted at the executive level and loan officers didn't have discretion to override the new standards. Maria's meeting Tuesday afternoon was the most difficult. They're essentially telling me that my loan wouldn't be approved under current policies, she called to report. The combination of my income level and the loan amount doesn't meet their updated guidelines. What does that mean for your situation? They're giving me 90 days to either find alternative financing or accept a significant increase in my interest rate and monthly payment. If I can't do either, they'll begin foreclosure proceedings. Maria's voice was strained with stress. I've been banking with Regional Community for over a decade. I don't understand why they're suddenly treating me like a problem customer. By Wednesday, the entire family was in crisis mode. Dad called that evening for an emergency family conference call to discuss their collective situation with Regional Community Bank. Something has changed at that bank, Dad said, his voice carrying both anger and anxiety. Either they've been acquired by a larger institution with different policies, or there's some kind of regulatory pressure forcing them to review existing loans. Whatever the reason, Elena added, we need to figure out our options quickly. If we all need to refinance elsewhere, we should coordinate our efforts. Carlos had done some research on alternative lenders. The problem is that current market rates are higher everywhere, he reported. Regional Community wasn't just being generous with our terms. The entire lending environment has become more restrictive. Which means we might not be able to replicate our current payments no matter where we go, Maria said. I might genuinely need to sell my house. The family spent an hour discussing potential strategies, but their options were limited. They had all become dependent on the favorable terms and accommodations provided by Regional Community Bank, and those benefits were now being systematically removed. I don't understand what triggered this, Dad said near the end of the call. We've been model customers for 20 years. Why would they suddenly decide to review all our accounts at the same time? It does seem like more than a coincidence, Elena agreed. 4 family members, all receiving review letters within the same week. Maybe someone filed a complaint about favoritism or discriminatory lending practices, Carlos suggested. Banks have to investigate those kinds of allegations very seriously. Thursday morning, I called Regional Community Bank again. I'd like an update on the Martinez family account reviews, I said when the president answered. The reviews are proceeding as scheduled, he replied. All 4 accounts are being adjusted to reflect current market standards and institutional policies. Any issues or complications with the process? The customer seemed surprised by some of the adjustments, but that's normal when people have been receiving favorable terms for extended periods. They've gotten used to accommodations that weren't sustainable long-term. I considered the situation carefully. The family had received exactly the reality check they had insisted I needed. They were learning firsthand how their financial stability depended on institutional relationships and market conditions beyond their control. I think we should continue with the standard adjustments, I said. But make sure all communications are professional and that customers understand their options. Understood. Should we provide any additional flexibility for these particular accounts? Treat them exactly like any other customers, I replied. No special accommodations but no unnecessary hardship either. Friday afternoon, Dad called with a final update on the family's situation. We've all received final notices from Regional Community Bank, he said. They're implementing the rate adjustments whether we like it or not. What did you decide to do? Elena and Carlos are going to try to refinance elsewhere, even though the rates won't be much better. Maria is putting her house on the market. Your mother and I are going to accept the higher payment and adjust our budget accordingly. Dad's voice carried resignation and frustration. 20 years of loyalty to that bank, and this is how they treat us when market conditions change. That must be very disappointing, I said. The worst part is feeling helpless, Dad continued. These institutions have so much power over people's lives, and there's nothing we can do when they decide to change their policies. It sounds like a difficult situation, I agreed. It really makes you understand how little control ordinary people have over their financial futures, Dad said. No matter how responsible you are, no matter how faithfully you make your payments, banks can change the rules whenever it suits their business interests. As the weeks passed, my family members adjusted to their new financial reality. Elena and Carlos successfully refinanced with other institutions, though their monthly payments increased by approximately $300 each. Maria sold her house and moved into a smaller apartment. My parents tightened their budget and accepted the higher mortgage payment, though they had to postpone some of their retirement plans. The experience had been sobering for all of them. They had learned that their comfortable middle-class lifestyles were more fragile than they had realized, dependent on institutional policies and market conditions that could change without warning. More importantly, they had gained a new perspective on financial risk and the relationship between individual circumstances and larger economic forces. The family members who had criticized my unrealistic financial expectations now understood how quickly their own supposedly stable situations could be disrupted. At Christmas dinner 3 months later, the conversation was markedly different from my birthday celebration. Instead of offering advice about financial responsibility and career stability, my family members seemed more focused on their own economic uncertainties. The mortgage situation really opened my eyes, Elena said during dinner. I thought I understood how banking worked, but I had no idea how vulnerable we all were to policy changes. It makes you realize how little control any of us actually have, Carlos added. We follow all the rules, make our payments on time, and then institutions can still change the terms whenever they want. Dad nodded grimly. The whole experience has given me a different perspective on financial security. What we thought was stability was really just temporary accommodation from people who could withdraw it at any time. I listened with interest as my family processed their new understanding of economic reality. They had learned important lessons about institutional power, market volatility, and the relationship between individual financial security and larger systemic forces. It's made me much more cautious about assuming that any financial arrangement is permanent, Maria said. Just because something has worked for years doesn't mean it will continue working. The family had also developed a new appreciation for the complexity of financial institutions and the various pressures they face from regulators, investors, and market conditions. I used to think banks were just service providers, Elena said. Now I understand their businesses with their own interests and constraints. As dinner concluded, Dad approached me privately. I want to apologize for some of the things I said at your birthday dinner, he said. I was pretty harsh about your financial situation. I appreciate that, I replied. This whole mortgage experience has given me a different perspective on financial risk and stability, Dad continued. I realized that my advice about taking safe, traditional approaches might not be as sound as I thought. Different strategies work for different people, I said. That's true. And I've been thinking that maybe your consulting approach gives you more flexibility and control than traditional employment would. Dad paused, then added, I still don't completely understand what you do or how you make money, but I've learned that I don't understand the financial system as well as I thought I did. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the events of the past several months. My family had gained valuable perspective on financial reality and institutional power, though the lessons had been more expensive than necessary. Regional Community Bank continued to operate successfully under my ownership, serving its community while maintaining appropriate professional standards. The irony, of course, was that my family still had no idea that their financial crisis had been orchestrated by the family member they had criticized for being financially delusional. But that was information for another day. Perhaps never. Some lessons were more valuable when people drew their own conclusions about financial security, institutional power, and the complex relationship between individual circumstances and larger economic forces. The important thing was that reality had been acknowledged, perspectives had been adjusted, and everyone had developed a more nuanced understanding of how financial systems actually worked. Everything else was just family dynamics,